do today. Exam on Friday on digestive and urinary. You have connect assignments that are due on Friday. Reproductive, urinary, and digestive. Yeah. Okay, 3 of them. All right, and then what? The ones that are assigned.
Digestive, urinary, and that's it. And reproductive?
Yeah. That's, whoa. Reproductive and urinary and digestive are the connect assignments. The exam is digestive and urinary. I understand the stress level's high, people. I understand. But let's just slow your roll a little bit, okay? A little bit. All right. So let's finish. We're going to go through reproductive, a bunch of reproductive today, and try to finish through male reproductive today, and then talk about the only thing I really want to talk about on Wednesday is development of the fetus and birth, childbirth. Okay? All right. So today we left off. We went through the ovarian cycle on Friday, and we left off talking about the structure of the ducts of the female reproductive system. Okay? So here you have the female reproductive system. Why is this not? Okay. There we go. All right. Female reproductive system, organs, the uterus, pear-shaped organ. It has 3 distinct layers. Okay? The uterus has 3 distinct layers. The innermost layer, what you see here, is the endometrium. Okay? The endometrium, the innermost layer. Okay? That is the layer that will recycle every month. It gets sloughed off during menstruation, and then it regenerates. Underneath that is a muscle layer. Okay? So the endometrium is the lining of the uterus, right, and the lumen of the uterus. It is where the attachment between fetus and mother develop. Okay? And then underneath that is the myometrium. Myometrium is muscle. So it's the muscle layer of the uterus, and it's significant, let's put it that way. Okay? And this is responsible for stimulation by hormones during childbirth. And so they'll have rhythmic contractions, which will, during childbirth, expel the fetus out of the body. Okay? On the outside, you have the perimetrium, which is the serosa. Okay? So it's the serosa layer on the outside. Okay, so from those 3 layers, perimetrium, myometrium, endometrium, from superficial or outside in. Okay? There are some parts of the uterus itself. You have what's called the fundus. That's this mounded portion right here. And then you have at the inferior surface of the uterus, you have the cervix, okay, and the cervical canal. There's 2 openings, the internal os and the external os. Those are just the openings to the inside. Normally, there are changes within the cervical mucus that is produced by the uterus or by the female, coincident with changes in hormones, coincident with the cycle that is ongoing, the ovarian cycle. Okay? Off of the uterus, there are two uterine tubes, also known as fallopian tubes. Okay? They are important in transferring the oocyte from its site of ovulation, the ovary, to the uterus, which is where normal implantation will occur. Okay? There are a couple different parts to the uterine tube. Okay? You have the infundibulum. It's kind of this funnel-looking part that sits on top of the ovary. And off of each of those infundibulum are these kind of like finger-like projections. Those finger-like projections are called Fimbriae. Okay? So fimbriae off of the infundibulum, then it kind of funnels together and shortens and gets a little less diameter, right? We call the ampulla, and rotates around. Then the isthmus extends towards the uterus, and then you have the uterine part, which really extends into the uterus. That is the whole fallopian tube or uterine tube, also known as oviducts. They're all synonyms for the same thing. Okay? The uterine tube is the site, the normal site of conception. That is normally where sperm and egg meet. Okay? In order for the timing to be correct, meaning that timing where conception occurs, growth of the fetus or the embryo occurs, and it continues to move down into the uterus, eventually being ready for implantation to occur at the same time where the endometrium is receptive and ready for implantation. Those two things have to meet up. Okay? So in order for pregnancy to occur, normally, conception occurs or fertilization occurs within the oviduct. Okay? Sometimes that period of fertilization, that kind of window of opportunity, can be altered. It can happen too early. It can happen too late. Okay? There's a little bit of a leeway, but if it happens too early sometimes, or if the epithelium within the oviduct, they are ciliated and they don't move the egg further along or the embryo further along, sometimes you end up with an embryo that actually implants into the uterine tube. And you end up with a pregnancy, okay, which occurs, and it's painful. So you end up with a little conceptus right here, right, umbilical cord, and then you get that's an ectopic pregnancy, right? Usually causes abdominal pain, right, and that has to be either surgically or hormonally removed, okay? That area, although it has similar tissue, meaning it has blood vessels and epithelium where a embryo can attach to an implant, it is not large enough nor cannot sustain a full pregnancy. All right, so that has to be removed. That can cause some serious complications if it's not. All right. At the base of the uterus, we talked about the cervix. Beyond the cervix is the vagina, muscular, a fibromuscular organ will receive the male fetus during intercourse, and also serves as a birth canal for childbirth. Questions on structure of the female internal anatomy? Okay, good. So let's talk about one thing that's very important for this structure, cervical cancer. Cervical cancer is a very common malignancy of the reproductive system. Other important ones, endometrial cancer, ovarian cancer. One of the most important risk factors, and one that has been a subject of intense research and clinical applications, is the human papillomavirus, HPV infection. Okay? And now there has been a vaccine that's been developed for the four most common types. HPV, most people don't even know they're infected with it, all right, most of the time, right? And if you haven't had a vaccine, likely at some point you will acquire HPV infection. And it may, cause a sexually transmitted infection, or it can kind of remain latent, especially in men. Okay, Pap smear is a procedure that females have done at their yearly gynecological appointments, and it works to detect cervical cancer at early stages. All right, the gynecologist will use a speculum, open up the vagina, observe the cervix, and take a little bit of epithelial cells scraped from the cervical edge and look at them for histology and morphology, and abnormal cells can be detected. If abnormal cells are present, there's a couple different procedures that can happen. They can freeze them, they can try to detect it early to remove any any cancerous cells before it causes more problems. If it goes undetected or untreated, the entire uterus and becomes invasive. The entire uterus can be removed to, right, as hysterectomy, right, that is present. Questions on cervical cancer? All right, so the big thing we're going to do today is talk about the menstrual cycle or the uterine cycle and menstruation in general. Okay? On Friday, we discussed and went over the events that occur in the ovary and the hormones that direct those events. Okay? So we talked about the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis. All right, a GnRH is produced by the hypothalamus, induces release of FSH and LH from the anterior pituitary, and that works on the ovary to, FSH works on the ovary to stimulate follicle development, and LH induces ovulation. As the follicle develops, it produces steroid hormones. Okay? As the follicle develops and gets larger prior to ovulation, it's producing a lot of estrogen, and then after ovulation, that follicle changes into a corpus luteum, and those cells then switch over from producing estrogen to producing progesterone. Okay, so those are the two types of steroid hormones we're going to be talking about. But now those steroid hormones, they also are going to they're going to have effects on the body. And one of the large effects is on the uterus and the cycle within the uterus. Okay? There are three distinct phases of the uterine cycle: the menstrual phase, the proliferative phase, and the secretory phase. Okay? The menstrual phase and the proliferative phase, these two are also associated with the follicular phase of the ovarian cycle. Okay, what happens, what hormone is predominant of the follicular phase of the ovarian cycle? Alex. All right, so that's from the anterior pituitary, but what steroid hormone is? Estrogen. Okay? So estrogen. So estrogen is going to feed back and is really going to affect the endometrium during those two phases. And during the secretory phase, we're really going to be looked at progesterone. Okay? Progesterone is going to influence how the endometrium functions or develops. Okay? So again, this is based upon a 28-day cycle, right? So the ovarian cycle is based upon a 28-day cycle from recruitment to death of the corpus luteum, I guess. And then the uterine cycle is based upon day zero, the onset of menses, of menstruation, to day 28, right? The end of the cycle, all right? Now, that varies depending upon the person, 21 to 35 days. 21 is really quite quick, all right? And they have a more lengthy cycle up to 35 days. You've seen this picture, okay, or at least 3/4 of it, okay? Let's focus. We can review on what's happening here in the primary follicle, secondary follicle, the mature follicle, ovulation, all right? And then we transfer over from follicular phase to luteal phase. We're going to produce progesterone, right, in the luteal phase, and really estrogen in the follicular phase, and that's what you see here at the bottom panel, ovarian hormones, right? Prior to ovulation, which happens right here, I'll draw a little line right through all of that. Okay, ovulation occurs at that line. You can see estrogen is high prior to ovulation, then it dips down. Progesterone is high after ovulation, during the luteal phase. Okay, but let's look what's happening in the endometrium at this time. Okay, here's your uterine cycle. Starts at day 0. You have menstrual flow, recovering from the previous cycle. Okay, where no pregnancy has been established, there's been a reduction in progesterone, and now that endometrial lining starts to slough off. Right, blood vessels are broken. The hormonal, the trophic nature, the growth, the sustainability of that comes from the hormone progesterone and estrogen during this cycle before is going down, right? So those hormones go down over here. You remove that hormonal stimulus, and these cells start to die off. Okay, that allows the endometrium to slough off. You begin the onset of menses. All right, menstruation begins, occurs for about 5 days. As over those 5 days now, in the ovarian cycle, we've started recruitment of the next follicle. Okay? So as you go towards the end of menstruation, about day 5, estrogen levels start to increase. We've recruited another follicle, and now it starts to grow. And as it starts to grow, it produces more and more estrogen. So after the menstrual phase, blood vessels have healed, and now we start to regenerate the endometrium. Okay? Now we enter the proliferative phase. Increased estrogen levels lead to an increase in cell proliferation of endometrial cells. Higher estrogen, and this starts to grow, up until the point of ovulation. Okay? At ovulation, what happens in the ovary? What happens to that follicle after ovulation? Nothing. It just sits there. Those cells change, right? They change over from estrogen to starting to produce progesterone. And as they produce progesterone, now you can see here that the cells start to behave a little bit differently. And we enter the other secondary phase of the uterine cycle called the secretory phase. Really, this is in preparation. Increased blood vessels, angiogenesis, more secretion of mucins and mucus, right? Development of glands in the uterus. They are preparing for potential pregnancy so that implantation can occur. All right, and so estrogen, really progesterone, up here in purple, progesterone induces this in coincidence or in cooperation with estrogen. Now when those hormones, if no pregnancy occurs, the corpus luteum regresses, progesterone levels go down, estrogen levels go down, you remove that hormonal stimulus, and now these cells, this tissue in the endometrium starts to die off. All right, and then you end up with the onset of menses in the beginning of the next cycle. All right, but it is dependent upon hormones, especially steroid hormones, and those come from the structures in the ovary. Okay, so 3 phases of the uterine cycle: menstrual phase, proliferative phase, secretory phase, dependent upon steroid hormones that are being produced from the ovary, the developing follicle, and the corpus luteum, right? That's estrogen and progesterone, and really 2 parts, the secretory phase, right? Those 2 hormones induce the secretory phase, and once you remove that hormonal stimulus, you start the cycle over again. So the uterine cycle and the ovarian cycle are linked, and the uterine cycle is dependent upon what's happening in the ovarian cycle. Okay? Questions? All right, so here's the interrelationship. Their book breaks it into a couple different things. What's happening days 1 through 5, ovarian cycle, uterine cycle, right? And the hormones, and it kind of puts it into perspective, really overlapping the two cycles together. Okay, so ovarian cycle, recruitment of a new follicle, we're in the follicular phase. In the uterine cycle, we're in the menstrual phase. Okay, now FSH and LH is being produced from the anterior pituitary and helping to recruit follicles. Now that follicle increases in size, has been recruited, starts to produce estrogen and progesterone. Estrogen goes up, progesterone levels are low. Now in the uterus, we are in the proliferative phase. In the ovary, we are still in the follicular phase. All right, and there's a feedback that's ongoing between estrogen, LH, FSH, and GnRH. All right, so the estrogen levels feed back, but then estrogen also induces growth of the follicle to a larger cycle, a larger stage prior to ovulation, and then the proliferative phase within the uterine cycle, cells are growing. All right, tissue is growing. And then days 13 to 14, we're in the end of the follicular phase and ovulation in the ovary, right? We are still in the proliferative phase within the uterine cycle, and now you have that LH surge, that spike in LH, which then induces ovulation. After ovulation, estrogen levels start to fall. We transfer over from a follicle to a corpus luteum. We move from a follicular phase to a luteal phase in the ovary. And we transfer over from a proliferative phase to a secretory phase in the uterus or in the endometrium. And that happens here, right? Ovarian cycle, luteal phase, uterine cycle, secretory phase. We are really preparing the body for potential pregnancy, right? And progesterone, also known as the pregnancy or hormone of pregnancy, is helping to prepare the endometrium for possible implantation. If there's no maternal recognition of pregnancy signal from a developing embryo, no production of human chorionic gonadotropin, the corpus luteum regresses after a certain number of days, progesterone levels fall, estrogen levels fall, and then we get removal of the hormonal stimulus, the endometrium, those cells die off, and you end up with the onset of menses again. And then we start the whole cycle all over. Questions on the female reproductive, John?
I'm not seeing any of these slides.
Okay, I forgot to put them up there.
All right, thanks.
So I will put them up there. I must have not hit submit on the thing. All right. So no questions. Oh, good. So we move on to the male reproductive system. We'll come back to female in a little bit. But males, again, is similar in general structure. Pair of gonads, a duct system to move gametes out of the body, and accessory organs that help with that. Okay, so so for the male system, we have the testes, that's the gonad, and then the duct system consists of the epididymis, the ductus deferens, and the accessory glands include the prostate, the seminal vesicles, and the bulbourethral glands. All right, and then the ductus deferens fuses with the urethra, and sperm is then ejaculated from the penis through the urethra. Overall, that's the system. It's not that. The testes. The testes are composed, well, they're housed outside of the body. They begin in development within the abdomen, and they descend during development out of the body because the structure and the production of sperm, these cells are most efficient at producing sperm at about 3 degrees lower than body temperature. So the testes are housed outside of the body in the scrotum, which is homologous to female labia majora. All right, outside. Within the testis, there's a series of tubules, right? We call seminiferous tubules. Within those tubules is where sperm is produced. And these tubules are continuous with the epididymis, where sperm are stored until they are ejaculated from the body. Okay? Because the testes begin development within the abdomen and they descend out of the body, they are actually wrapped in, there's a layer, 2 layers of peritoneum that actually wrap around them. And that's what the visceral layer of the tunica vaginalis is. Right? So that's really a remnant of the peritoneum that has extended out as the testes descend from the body. Okay? In some cases, a retained testicle occurs, right, where they failure to drop, and that is called Cryptorchidism. Okay, and you can have mono or di Cryptorchidism. Okay, mono, one testis fails to descend. Di, both of them fail to descend. Within the testis itself, the tubules are broken up into different, what we call lobules, different areas, and then they come together. This tubule straightens out and then fuses with the epididymis. The seminiferous tubules are where spermatogenesis occurs. Okay, so where sperm cells are made. And again, this is dependent upon GnRH from the anterior pituitary, from the hypothalamus, right, to the anterior pituitary inducing FSH and LH, right, that's from the anterior pituitary, and then working on the testis, right? The testes then will produce testosterone and also produce sperm. Okay, that's what FSH does, induces the production of sperm or spermatogenesis. Within the tubules, okay, this is a section of the tubule, so you have this layer right here is the boundary of the tubule, okay, and over here is the lumen. All right, so along the periphery of the tubule is where you will have stem cells. Those stem cells are called spermatogonia. Okay, so you have them right here. So there's a couple stem cells, spermatogonia, you have a couple more over here, right? And those stem cells are diploid, and they are the beginning cells that will undergo meiosis to produce sperm. Okay? And so as it moves closer to the lumen, right, meiosis eventually occurs and you end up with spermatozoa on the interior of the lumen. Okay? There are some other cells within the tubule we call sustentacular cells. I learned them as Sertoli cells, right? Or nurse cells. They help to maintain and sustain the sperm cells that are undergoing meiosis, okay, and spermatogonia. All right? And then out here, in between, so you have this area out here between the tubule, out here, okay, we call it interstitial cells, also known as Leydig cells. Okay? They are, interstitial means between cells, or in this case, between tubules. They are not within the seminiferous tubules, they're outside. But they are targeted by LH, okay, and what they do is produce testosterone. Testosterone is necessary for spermatogenesis to occur. Okay? So both of these things they are dependent on each other. So LH and FSH together are necessary for spermatogenesis to occur. LH targets the Leydig cells to produce testosterone, while FSH targets the spermatogonia and the sperm and the sustentacular cells to produce sperm to undergo meiosis. Okay? So here's really the production of androgens. FSH, so GnRH, right, targets the anterior pituitary, produce FSH and LH. That then targets the testes. So again, you have your hypothalamus, anterior pituitary, gonadotropin axis, gonadal axis, and what happens within there, right? Androgen binding protein is important, right? And it's produced by both those, helps with those, the production of testosterone and binding of testosterone in the blood. Okay, and that helps to increase libido, increase muscle gain, development of body hair, deepening of the voice, etc. Secondary sex characteristics of males. Okay, so the process, spermatogenesis is really split into two parts, spermatogenesis and spermiogenesis. Okay, so what we're talking about really is producing a haploid cell, and then having spermiogenesis really is the second part of that. Okay, so we have this second part of meiosis is spermiogenesis. All right, so spermiogenesis is part of the overall process of spermatogenesis. Okay, so what you have your diploid cell at the beginning. Up here, your spermatogonia, okay, would be, which is right here, diploid, 2N. Okay, and then it starts to divide, undergoes meiosis. Right, meiosis is a reduction to division. Right, at first the spermatogonia divide. One of those cells stays a spermatogonium, right? The other one starts to undergo meiosis, and now that's a primary spermatocyte, all right, and undergoes meiosis 1, splits into 2, and then meiosis 2 and splits into 4, okay? The outcome of spermatogenesis is 4 haploid sperm cells, okay? 4 haploid sperm cells. And then those are what we call spermatids. By that point, they're spermatids, and then they start to develop the shape of sperm. Okay, they develop an acrosome cap, and that's what you see over here, right? The spermatid, they have undergone meiosis up to this point, and now they start to differentiate into the structure of a sperm. Structure of a sperm, you have a head, a midpiece, and tail. Right, so all of the nucleus, all of the DNA has been concentrated into the head of the sperm with an acrosome cap on top, which is important for binding and interaction with the egg. Right, and it has binding proteins and enzymes that will help dissolve the zona pellucida for fertilization to occur. Underneath that is the nucleus where all the DNA is, and the mitochondria are collected in the midpiece to produce energy for motility. And there's a development of the tail or the flagellum that will help with motility. From there, after the production of sperm, they're still not ready they're not activated. Okay, so they're non-motile at this point. They are moved to the epididymis where they're stored, and then they are activated for motility prior to ejaculation. All right, so that's those two, spermatogenesis and spermiogenesis put together. All right, so this overall process, we go from spermatogonium, okay, spermatogonium, then primary spermatocyte, then to secondary spermatocyte, then to spermatid, then to spermatozoa. That's the process. That's diploid, and all of them down here are haploid. Questions on overall process of spermatogenesis? All right, spermatogenesis starts at puberty on the onset of GnRH production and continues throughout life. Okay, continues throughout the male life. As testosterone levels fall, as males get old, go past 40, 50 years old, testosterone production falls off. Spermatogenesis falls off, but they're still present. Okay. Here is an explanation of the 5 different parts: Spermatogonia, primary, secondary spermatocyte, spermatid, and spermatozoa. You can see where diploid and haploid transfer over. And then the development of spermiogenesis, where you end up with the structure, really the production of the structure of a sperm. And at the spermatozoa, they leave the tubule and enter the epididymis storage and activation. Okay? Over time, this process is not loses quality control. Okay, so yes, males can have children when they're 45, 50, 60, 70 years old. There's been plenty of incidents where elderly gentlemen have had children. Okay, but as you increase in age, similar to females, that increases the incidence of genetic problems. All right, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, autism, depression, ADD, ADHD are all associated with this. Now it says maternal age is not correlated with an increase in these disorders. This is true, but they are also, maternal age is correlated with an increase in non-disjunction events. Do we know what non-disjunction is? During meiosis, we split from 46 chromosomes to 23. Okay? That is a disjunction. We're breaking up the association of chromosomes. Okay? So if one chromosome doesn't break up, okay, doesn't split pairs. So if I have 23 pairs, they should split into 23 and 23, right? Which then, plus another 23 haploid sperm, would be a lovely 46 diploid individual, right? But if one of these 23 pairs doesn't split, okay, so then one of them will be 24, and the other one would be 22. Plus the 23 from another gamete, what do you end up with? 45 or 47. Okay? 47, and this non-disjunction event is correlated, is associated with Down syndrome. Okay? Trisomy 21. 3 copies of chromosome 21 as a result of this non-disjunction. Okay? And Down syndrome has a characteristic facial features, mental disabilities, of a range of mental and physical disabilities. All right. So, bottom line, age of both sexes carries a risk of developmental problems, right? Depending upon whether they're genetic, right, derived from mom or dad. The duct system, right? So, sperm is produced in the testes within the seminiferous tubules, stored in the epididymis. When, upon orgasm, the sperm will move out of the epididymis into the ductus deferens, through the ductus deferens, through the prostate, and into the urethra and out of the body. Okay? 3 glands that were important for the prostate, the seminal vesicles, and the bulbourethral glands. They help, they provide, and they add to the seminal fluid. Okay? They produce sugars, fructose, that will help to provide an energy source for the semen, or for the sperm, excuse me. Okay? They provide an antibiotic nature to that will help to protect the sperm. Okay? The sperm is going to be deposited in the female vagina, which will recognize sperm as foreign. Okay? So this antibiotic, antibacterial will help prevent urinary tract infections for the male, and also will allow for the sperm to be protected within the women's reproductive organs. Okay? There's also a neutralizing factor in terms of pH. Females' reproductive system, the vagina is acidic, and that it needs to be neutralized in order for sperm to be protected as well. Right? So the bulbourethral gland produces a clear mucus fluid that help to lubricate and clean the urethra. All right? Help for lubrication during sex, and also clean the urethra prior to ejaculation. Questions on the duct system? This is also a conduit for urine. So there are 3 different parts of the urethra that we are concerned with, right? We have the prostatic urethra, which actually goes through, right, through the prostate. And then it joins with the urethra, all right, and then extends down through the penis. Okay? For sexual intercourse, all right, so there's a sexual response, the physiology of the joining of gametes eventually, right? Each gender, each sex, male and female, have similar responses. Okay, there's 3 phases to the sexual response, and they have similarities. Right? We have the excitement phase, the orgasm phase, and the resolution phase. Okay? In females, as in males, different organs engorge with blood. Right? So homologous organs such as the penis and the glands of the penis, the head of the penis to the clitoris, they both engage with blood and that's during a state of arousal. Okay? And then after that, we have the orgasm phase. It includes intense pleasure, tension and release, and contraction of the vagina and uterus in females. Similar in males, except there's also the expulsion of semen. That's caused by contraction of muscles, right, in the male reproductive system. And then resolution. Afterwards, relaxation, the excess blood leaves organs. Right? In females, there's no refractory period, so things can continue. And then in males, there is a refractory period where there's no additional response. Loss of engorged blood. There's contractions of the muscle to move blood out of the penis, and then the penis is flaccid and cannot be re-stimulated for a period of minutes to hours. Okay, as you get older, that refractory period gets longer, and yeah, I guess there's no "and" there. Okay, both male and female responses, the sexual response is dependent upon both parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system response. Okay? They need a parasympathetic nervous system response to allow for erection to occur in males. Right? But then you need a sympathetic response to have orgasm and have ejaculation. Okay? Similar, or let's say synonymous, innervation and stimulation occurs in females. Questions on the sexual response, reproductive system of males, or spermatogenesis, or the uterine cycle that we covered today. It's quite a lot. So on Wednesday, what we're going to end up doing, we're going to talk about what happens when sperm and egg meet, and then development and of the fetus, and eventually childbirth.